I suppose one of the main characteristics of the period that we're looking at, the period of the formation of the Labour Party, is that it happened at a time when official society was at the kind of peak of the Victorian colonial idea. But at the bottom of society, something very different was happening, because the origins of the Labour Party come from the new union movement, the huge explosion of trade unionism in the 1880s, in the midst of the suffragette movement, in the midst of the Great Unrest, another huge outbreak of industrial struggles in the run-up to the First World War. So my first question is, how do you assess the impact of these social movements on the formation of the Labour Party?
I suppose one of the main ingredients was that in the 19th century, as John said, with the growth of trade unionism, there was a new political movement beginning. And the Labour Representation Committee was based on the idea that we've got the vote, and now we want to have somebody to represent us in Parliament. And then you had the Independent Labour Party, you had the Social Democratic Federation, which was a socialist ingredient, and all these forces gradually grew and began organising in one shape or form, and out of it came the Labour Party.
The issue of the socialist, specifically the socialist presence inside the Labour Party, has been hugely contentious in modern politics. But at the foundation of the Labour Party, it was very, very powerful. I mean, you had the Marxist element, which has, again, always been contentious.
Well, I think that was what gave the Labour Party, in the end, its common purpose, that they were united against a system of a market force system under which people were all subjected permanently to market forces. And then people began to see that market forces were the very forces which were repressing them. And so then they began to ask themselves about the structure of society and how it might be changed. And the old phrase, educate, agitate, and organize, does constitute a perfectly fair account of what was happening. People, first of all, began to understand what forces were in society, then to campaign on the things they believed in, and then to look forward to a different type of society. And the socialist ingredient has been a very strong element from the beginning, though never really a dominant element, but a very strong element.
And right in the middle of the period of the formation of the Labour Party, of course, the First World War explodes. So there's, in a way, that nationalist narrative that was running through the whole Victorian period then collides with the rise of the Labour movement and the rise of the Labour Party. So do you want to say a little bit about how you think the First World War impacted on that?
Well, there was a very strong opposition to the First World War because people, socialists and others, looked at it, realized that nationalism was a very dangerous force which bound people together on the basis of nationality rather than economic interest. And so you always had a very strong peace movement there in the background. And in the First World War, of course, the Labour Party was opposed to the war, even though the parliamentary leaders were cooperating with the war, because one element that has to be taken very seriously into account is that as the Labour Party emerged from being just a voice of criticism, it became an organised political party that had to take a stand. And as it took a stand, it became associated with the very ideas that were exciting people, namely socialist or Marxist ideas.
But I mean, it was a contentious and divisive moment, wasn't it? Because, I mean, for instance, the suffragette movement split down the middle over this. Sylvia Pankhurst was anti-war, went off to organise in the East End of London, worked with George Lansbury and Labour Party figures, but the other members of the Pankhurst family were pro-war. So it was a very cathartic moment in the movement.
Well, the relation between the suffragette movement and the Labour Party is an interesting one, because at the beginning of the century, there was a strong ingredient in the Labour Party that said, look, we're engaged in a class battle, not a gender battle. And Keir Hardie and others who took up the suffragette cause managed to persuade the party that you couldn't divide, that actually the rights of women were integral to the development of rights of everybody at work. And so the suffragette movement came into the Labour Party and, in the end, if you like, took it over.
As a socialist, do you think that nationalism can ever be a force for progress? Just thinking in terms of the context of this weekend and talking about the rise of nationalism and nation states?
Well, nationalism is a very dangerous force, in my opinion. When I was a child at school, there was a teacher who said to me, there are only two sorts of people in the world, the British and foreigners. And there were a lot of foreigners, and we were only the British. And I think this idea of the human race is beginning to emerge as an understanding of the world which operates quite against nationalism. I find Scottish nationalism similarly divisive and destructive, this idea that the real problem in Scotland is the English, instead of the problem that affects working people in every country, including Scotland, which is the force of capital. So it's something to be very, very careful of, and I'm very sceptical about nationalism. But I can see the appeal it has, particularly if you feel you're embattled or you feel you're being oppressed. It's easier to project that sense of oppression to foreign countries and immigrants than to see it in its real socialist sense. It's the people who run the world, and they're not foreign nations or foreign people. They're capitalist institutions that have enormous power in controlling what governments do.
What makes you most proud of the history of the Labour Party, and the history of the Labour Party, I guess?
Well, I think it is that people together have succeeded in achieving things. I mean, when you look at the problems facing us at the moment, they're formidable. The problems of unemployment, which are widespread, the danger of war, and it's very easy for people to become so oppressed by that they think it's not worth making the effort. Whereas the history of this country, and I suppose of every country in the world, is of successful campaigns that have made progress. That's how slavery was abolished, how the ban on trade unions was abolished by the Tolpuddle martyrs, how women got the vote. And so it isn't that things will automatically come right, but that if you do campaign, you can win, and that hope that you can win is what makes you proud of what's been achieved.
What advice do you give to young people who want to go into politics, particularly Labour?
Well, I do get letters from young people saying, dear Mr. Benn, I'm writing to you because I'd like to go into politics. I haven't decided which party to join. You know, my sister's a doctor, my brother's a lawyer. I thought I'd be a member of Parliament. And I think what you have to do is to discover what cause you believe in, attach yourself to it. It might be the anti-war movement or the coalition of resistance. Attach yourself to the movements in which you believe, throw your weight in with them, you will learn from them, and then you will acquire the experience you could use to campaign for the things you believe in. But the main thing is to get rid of pessimism, because pessimism is a weapon used deliberately by the right to frighten people off from attempting anything. You're unrepresentative, you're just causing trouble, you know. It'll never work. The whole system's corrupt. And that is designed to drive people from pessimism into inactivity. I'm 87 now, and you've been very kind in the way you put your questions. And this story comes out of that. When you're old, you do have certain problems, one of which is you have to go to the lavatory quite a lot. And I was in my car a couple of years ago in the central London when I realized that I had to go to the lavatory and I didn't know what to do. So I had the bright idea. I got out of the car, lifted the hood, leaned over, unzipped, and I think they call it in the city quantitative easement. And as I was standing there, a man came up and he said, "Sir, I think I know your problem." So I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I think your radiator's leaking." So I said, "Thanks very much." I zipped up my flies, closed the hood, and drove off. And never be afraid of getting old. That's the point. Really.